Thank you, Bob. And first of all, thank you very much to Geospatial Media for inviting me to speak today. It's a real honour to be here presenting this afternoon. So I guess you might expect somebody from Britain's National Mapping Agency to talk to you about maps and talk to you about spatial data this afternoon. I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to talk to you about how the UK government has tried to make a difference to its public services. And by the way, they're using maps and spatial data to do that. But just a little bit about us, just in case you haven't heard of us. So, Ordnance Survey of Great Britain, been mapping Great Britain for around 224 years, since 1791. We recently looked at the value of our data to the British economy, and an independent assessment suggested back in 1999 it was around about £100 billion. And in turn, that helps generate revenues of around £400 billion to the UK economy each year. We have around 260 surveyors on the ground using GPS, using pentop computers. We have a couple of aircraft in the air, flying the country through the months, and we're making around 10,000 changes a day to the large-scale map data. And in return, that helps the government of the UK, now over 3,500 organisations, to actually make those better decisions about their policy and about their policy implementations. And I think you all recognise this, right? Location is that vital ingredient. Whether it's trying to manage congestion on the roads, whether it's trying to coordinate 3 or 4 different utility companies to come and dig up the road at the same time, whether it's trying to optimise the delivery of those public transportation and bus services, whether it's about how to plan for solar or wind energy, location's absolutely at the centre of all those things. And I think what we found in the UK is that people were using location, they were using spatial data. So you had emergency services planners using maps and spatial data. You had environmentalists using spatial data. You had central government agencies using spatial data. But they weren't really talking to each other. They were all doing their own thing. They were all ploughing their particular furrow of their policy, and they weren't really sharing that data with each other. And what we quickly realised, actually, if we could enable a way of getting government particularly to share data with one another, then you'd make better decisions. You'd have all the information available about a particular location to make the best possible decision, whatever that might be, about that location. So, I like to think of a spatial location as a meeting point for information. I guess you're all familiar with the concept of a rendezvous point at an airport. So if there's a big issue at an airport, there's a green sign, normally on the perimeter fence somewhere, that says rendezvous point. And that's a known point that the fire, the police, the ambulance, the military all know they have to meet together. So think about the notion of a location reference being a rendezvous point for all your information, bringing that all together in a place that everybody knows is undisputed and unambiguous. So, how can you do that? You could use a place name maybe, but that's going to be a little bit too general. You might use an X and Y coordinate, that's pretty good, get you into the general location, but actually what you might find when you get there is if you're looking for a particular address, there might be many addresses in around an X and Y coordinate. You could use a postcode like we do in the UK. That might get you down to about 100 addresses. But actually what we've decided to do in the UK is use a unique spatial code for every real world object. So whether that be an address, whether that be a piece of road, it now has a unique 12-digit reference. So there's no ambiguity about that location in the landscape. And what the UK government decided to do was, well actually we've got all these different organisations doing different things. The first thing we need to do is have a single agreement with the National Mapping Agency for the data. So around 4 years ago, there is now a single agreement for all of government to get hold of its spatial data from Ordnance Survey. A sort of open data for government, if you like. So that's been a great success. And as part of that, that means that everybody does use the same spatial reference. They use the same spatial foundation to make those decisions. And at the heart of it is something called the unique property reference number. So what most government advisors, decision makers are trying to understand around location is pretty much where is something, what or who is there, what do I need to do when I get there, and how do I do it? So what happens is every time a property is built in the UK, the local municipality will assign this unique spatial code, this unique property reference number. And it's allocated at the creation of that particular property. And what you can then do is you can start to use that common 12-digit number to link together different information from all parts of government. So you might like to link your cadastral polygons to that reference. So all the land registration, the register of land is linked to that same reference. So if government needs to know about that cadastral parcel, they can just use the 12-digit reference to actually make that link. All the utility companies use that reference to understand who they're supplying power, electricity, water to, and who they're billing and who their customers are. Again, all linked through this common unique property reference number code. The geology can also be linked to that code. So to get an understanding about possible subsidence risks or flood risks, again, information coming from all these different parts of government, all being layered on one common reference, enabling people to make better decisions using a more general set of information. And what's happened now is up there, what you can see is, in the middle is pretty much all the main departments of British government, so transportation, environment, land registration, emergency planning, taxation, Department for Transport. And around the outside, you can see some of the bigger policy initiatives currently going on in the UK. So things like smart meter rollout, census, individual electoral registration, getting voters to register online, understanding where the most vulnerable properties are in flood risk plains. All of those initiatives have now legislated through parliamentary acts and bills that the UPRN should be the reference that everybody uses. So that's a massive help. So instead of everybody going off and doing their own thing and using their own particular approach to that location, the government now says, hang on a minute guys, this is the exact reference and location code you should use when you're dealing with these large government initiatives. So that's been a great success. And what the government has said to us is, it's great we've now got all this data from Ordnance Survey available. It's great we've now got a common reference system for every address in Great Britain. But what difference is it making? What value is the UK government getting out of this approach? And what value are citizens getting out of this approach? So I'm just going to show you now a few specific examples of where government organisations, both at the local and central level, have started to use data and deliver some real economic, societal and environmental benefits. Now this is an interesting one. The Department for Work and Pensions decided that every time a baby was born or somebody died in the UK, it was quite an onerous process. So every time you wanted to report a birth or a death, you would have to probably, as a citizen, deal with up to 19 different organisations across government. That's 19 different interactions with government to say, we've got a birth or we've got a death. So passport office, taxation, benefits, local municipality, all need to be told of this event. And then what they said is actually, okay, we've got the unique property reference number now, everybody's using that reference. Let's just have a single point for the citizen to actually talk to us. So now citizens can go online, they can tell government once about that birth or that death, and that's it. They have to have one interaction. And the Department for Work and Pensions have done some analysis, and they reckon that over 10 years, this application will save them something like $400 million US dollars across the 10 years of this program. And in addition, a further $100 million savings for families who no longer have to make that trip to those different organisations or agencies, park their car, travel, etc. So that's just one small application making some significant savings in government, but also making a real difference to how the citizens interact with government as well. Now, another challenge back in the UK is when someone has a crash or an incident on the street, is actually reporting that to the emergency services effectively. So what tends to happen is somebody might be out on the road, they see a couple of cars crash, they get on the phone and they ring 999. I'm not sure what the number here is in South Africa, but in the UK it's 999, and you get hold of the emergency control room and they'll say, police, fire, ambulance, and invariably you'll say, police. The operator at the other end will say, first of all, where are you? And most people will try and have a good go at actually describing where they are. They may say, I'm standing outside Starbucks on the high street, or I'm standing here. The operator then has to try his best to try and understand exactly where that incident is. And if they get it right, of course the ambulance or the police car gets out to the location in the quickest possible time without any time being lost. But then what happens is that police control room has to make a separate phone call to the fire control room, to the ambulance control room. Now those phone calls typically take 4 minutes to make. And there is a risk that the location is misconstrued when it's delivered to those other control rooms. So you can get instances of 3 different emergency vehicles turning up in slightly different places. So we thought that wasn't acceptable. So in the country of Wales, they've decided to use, again, the UPRN as a way of making absolutely sure that the correct location is identified. So now when the control room takes in the call, this may be the ambulance taking the call, they quickly assign the elite 12-digit reference to that location. That's fired into a hub, and then milliseconds out to each of the other control rooms is an instant, unambiguous way of sharing that location with all those emergency vehicles, which means they all turn up at exactly the same place, they get there in the quickest possible time. The estimated savings in Wales are around 18,000 hours per annum, so all those 4-minute phone calls have gone down to milliseconds of data-to-data transfer. But more importantly, there's a chance that people now get those emergency services to them in the quickest possible time. Turning now to the issue of school buses. Now this is one school up in the north of England, up in Yorkshire, about 1,000 pupils at this one school, 550 of them on school buses. And what the local authority decided to do was actually have a look at that. So they contracted out their school bus services, and just by looking at how to optimise those 14 vehicles using a simple GIS approach, they actually managed to take the number of buses down from 14 to 11. No pupil's journey was affected, so all the pupils still got to school at the same time. But interestingly, as a result of doing that, they saved around 1.5 million US dollars, about 19 million rand in that 3-year contract. Also, if you consider each one of those buses is pumping out 1.7 tonnes of CO2 as well, there's a significant environmental savings. So that's just one school in England. Just think about then, if you took that model and rolled it out to the full nation in England. Think about not just the environmental savings, but those economic savings that would be made by rolling out that model nationally. And here's just a few more examples, and this is what we have to do, because governments say to us, look, you're giving us this data, we're buying it from the Ordnance Survey, how is it making a difference? Where is the value being achieved? What difference is it making to citizens' lives? And conservative estimates by economists in UK government currently estimate that for every £1 that's spent on spatial data, they're getting about 13 back in savings. And that's, I think, very conservative. I think it's probably a bit more than that. But at the moment, we're seeing about a 1 to 13 ratio of savings made from the investment in spatial data. And it was interesting to see Sanjay's economic models this morning. Here's just one from Ireland. They've done a similar exercise in looking at the economic benefits of spatial data in Ireland. They've estimated that the public sector cost savings are around $92 million a year, and the time savings could even be as much as 314 million US dollars per annum. Moving now to natural hazards, and again, we have many government organisations that have a responsibility around natural hazards, whether it be weather, landslip, flood. We've had quite a lot of flooding in the UK over recent years. You may have seen on the news. We don't get the big disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes, but we do get our fair share of rain and a fair share of flooding. So again, the UK government decided to actually try and coordinate all the different natural data that was around. So there's something now being called the Natural Hazards Partnership. It brings together all those government organisations that have a responsibility for natural items, weather, flood, geology, and enables them to use that data in a shared information way. So again, the best decisions are made, the best planning decisions are made about flood, the best response decisions are made about those natural events. And so they've all come together to create this hub of information, and each day there's a hazard assessment which goes out to all the members of that consortium, which then informs citizens of any impending heavy weather, rain, storm, snow, whatever it is in the UK. And here's just one example where bringing together precise meteorological data from the Met Office on wind speed together with the road network. You can see there that the red segments of the road network are highlighted where there might be a particular risk to high-sided lorries. So again, we can start to tell those high-sided lorries, you may not want to think about going on those particular roads at this particular time of day because you might risk actually getting blown over and causing major congestion issues. So here's just some pictures of some of the flooding in the UK. This was a particularly nasty event, I think a year or two ago, where the main railway line between London and the southwest of Britain got completely washed away. It took the line out for about, I think, 5 weeks. It was the major link for tourists going down into the West Country, so there was quite a drive to get that fixed. So by having a system that actually helps people bring their information together, to actually plan how they're going to deal with these things more effectively, is really, really necessary. And the UK government actually asked Ordnance Survey to build something for them which would make that better. So they said, look, we've got all these emergency responders, military guys, all doing slightly different things. Can we not just put all this information in one place? Can we not just have a system that gives every user on the ground, the teams on the ground, the planners, a common operating picture of a particular emergency event? So what we've done is, working with the Cabinet Office in the UK and others, is build something called Resilience Direct, and effectively it's a web service portal that gives access to every emergency responder in the UK to that same picture. So the ability to put their own information on there, whether it be planning for where the wind might be coming from, building a buffer around a particular event to understand which particular properties might be affected by that event to plan better for it. We actually worked with the government to build a set of common map symbology because people were using different symbols for different things. So for an evacuation point, people use different symbols. For a rendezvous point, people used different symbols. There's now a simple drop-down list of all of those common symbols that emergency services can use to deploy on the map, and then is replayed out instantly to teams on the ground. And what it does is the service brings together hundreds of different government data sets in one place to any of those users. So you can first of all find a location, you can then play in any layer from that library on the left-hand side, so that might be actually population data. So what that is the population of premises during the day and during the night. So we measure the change of people in a building between the night time and the daytime. That's measured by the health and safety laboratories. So you can get an understanding of how many people may be affected in a particular area. You might like to just quickly plot where something might be happening. Here is a disease outbreak. Again, you can quickly, using the tools online, to create buffers, to actually bring in other information from government. And this is all happening in real time. So the ability to change this picture, deliver it to the teams on the ground, deliver it to the operation teams in the Cabinet Office, and ensure that everybody's seeing exactly the same picture on the ground, and seeing each other's data in the same picture on the ground for that event. So, in summary, what we've seen in the UK is, first of all, the UK government deciding to actually adhere to a common set of spatial data through the National Mapping Agency, and then adhere to the notion of a single reference framework. And what that's meant is we're seeing easier information exchange between organisations and users. I think before this framework was in place, something like 80% of people's time was spent actually trying to make sense of data and actually trying to bring that data together, and only 20% of their time was actually used to make real decisions. That has changed since the implementation of this framework, in that now it's 80% of time is spent actually making good decisions about particular policy delivery. It does mean you get the best evidence. It does mean you have all that information to hand to actually make those best decisions. It does mean that you get better citizen services. Citizens have an easier time of it when they're dealing with government by using these processes. And hopefully I've demonstrated that there are some significant cost savings and some time savings that can come out of this approach. And I think, finally, there are just three takeaway points. One is I think this UNAID code can be that meeting point for information from different sources. Spatially connected government is one thing. You can put in the reference system, you can give them the data, you can enable them with a common reference system, but actually it only really works when you get the people engaged. You actually have to get the people to sit around the table and actually agree to this. So you can do anything you like around the technology, but really at the end of the day, you've got to get the people around the table as well. And I think ultimately, this notion of spatially connected government means that governments can make a real difference to their citizen services, and you can see some big economic, environmental and societal benefits playing out from that. Thank you very much for your time.